Hi, welcome. Today we are going to be talking about the rebranding of Richard Solutions, and it's been a long and painful process. But what I wanted to do was talk about it with Brandon Wilson, who is the co-creator of the new look and feel of Richard Solutions. And what we wanted to do with this is kind of explain the thinking, the reasoning, and how we did it. So hopefully, when it comes to doing your own rebranding, it doesn't have to be as painful, but also we can talk and share with you the process and the learnings about how we did it. So thank you for joining us. Like I said, I'm Richard Liverman from Richard Solutions. And Brandon, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Sure. Yeah, my name's Brandon Wilson. I created a freelance company. It's just me, called Brandon Wilson Creative. And I'm a designer. I think that's a very general term. I'm mostly in the digital space. And I think why Richard and I get along so much is because we are very passionate about branding and experiences. And we can talk the talk when it comes to design. And just before we were recording, we were talking about, there's a lot of things that we know and we can move along pretty quickly on creative projects like this, but not everybody kind of understands what goes into a proper brand refresh. So, but yeah, I'm excited to kind of pull the curtain back with you and kind of discuss how we did it and the things, that we liked. And I mean, for me, it was a very pleasurable experience, but you said it was painful. I would love to dig into why it was painful for you.
Well, I think the pain was not working with you. I just want to highlight that right at the start. I think the pain for me was I'm really passionate about branding and marketing. It's sort of, I've spent my whole career in it. And I think the reason why it was painful for me was looking at where I was and knowing where I needed to get to. And that gap for me was where I think the pain was. And I think if we go back to why should anybody rebrand, I think you need to know yourself pretty well. And I think it was last summer, I was looking at my branding and my website, and I set my business up 3 years ago this autumn, and I did it all myself. I got a logo which I liked, and built a website myself, and that was fine. When I set my business up, I had very little budget, and I was sort of working on it all by myself, and built a website through a template, built a brand, but it never really sat right with me. And I sort of carried this for a couple of years and just went, this does not reflect who I am. And I think that's where the pain came in. And I remember talking to you last summer and you going, Rich, your website does not match the person that I'm speaking to. And you weren't the only one that said that. So I think here's the painful bit. Go on, tell them what you thought of the website without swearing.
Well, I think, and a lot of people can relate to this. It is really hard to talk about yourself, right?
Yeah.
It's also really hard to design a business and go onto a website, go onto a social media platform and put yourself out there and say, yeah, that's me. And it's hard because not everybody knows how to use a camera, how to use typography, color, contrast, all those things. And, the iPhone has done a great job giving people the ability to take pretty good photos with software and stuff like that. But these commercials for websites, they say that you can have a beautiful website, click with a template, and you have a beautiful website in 2 clicks. And I just think that if you have an eye for design, yeah, probably could. But most people just don't. I don't think they really understand what those things are that actually do pull off a good design. And I think it actually hurts people. So I think it's just hard to design an identity online. So when I saw yours, I was just blown away because I know your experience and history with design and working with designers and creative teams. And you said, yeah, I'm not a designer. I know good design. I know what goes into it. I just can't do. I know this about myself. And in the beginning, I'm like, yeah, whatever. You're just being hard on yourself. When I saw your website, I was like, no way, no way, no way. This is your website. And I didn't really, it wasn't like I was going for the jugular when I was giving you my feedback. I was being just honest. I'm always honest. That's why I do what
That's
I
that.
do.
I think that's fair, and I don't think it was just the website, and I think this is where I think a lot of people think that marketing begins and ends at a website. For me, a website's part of the mix. What was really interesting was when you looked at not just the website, but across some of my documents, my visual identity, and I think we recognised that there was a gap. And what was really
Presentation.
interesting was, yeah, but gap's the wrong word. It was more like a chasm. And I think what's really interesting is looking at the identity and thinking about, okay, I know where I need it to be, and this is where it is now. And I was just talking to you about, right, how do we fix that gap? And it was so much more than a website. It was actually looking at the fundamentals of the brand. But before we even got to that stage, I thought what was interesting was, we did a bit of research, and that research was, for me, really revealing. So talking to some of my existing clients, some of my past clients, asking them for feedback about the business, why they work with me, what they got from the experience, and sort of adding that kind of information into to you to help fill the gap between my visual identity where it was and where it needed to be. And what was interesting through the research was that, and I shared that with you, it was from all different parties, was that there was a lot of positives in the business, but visually it wasn't there, if that makes sense. Did you get
It
that
was boring.
impression?
It was boring.
Yeah.
And you always say, don't be boring. And that was the thing. That was like I almost fell over my seat, honestly, because I was like, this guy is always telling people there's nothing wrong with the flavor of vanilla, but come on, don't be vanilla. Don't be boring. Don't play it safe. Stand out. And when you hear Richard talk and you see Richard, like right now, you have a pink hoodie and all that stuff. And like this was not what I was expecting when I went to your website. Shades of gray, like no offense to all parties that were involved before, but like it doesn't matter in the business world. You are not reflecting who you
Yeah.
really are. And I know you struggled with that. And I learned even more about that. Just as a person, like as a friend, like you saying, like, Brandon, I've always had a hard time just kind of showing myself to the world, especially in a business on a very professional level. And that was like the big why that you came to me. And like you liked my style, so it kind of worked out because like, yeah, man, like I'd love to help. You're like, no, like I want to pay you. I want to hire you, Brandon. We're gonna do this the right way, not like as friends. We'll be friendly and we'll do all that stuff, but we're gonna do this the right way. And I'm glad that
Yeah.
you put your foot down and did that, because I
It
felt
was
that
it
already.
was the right thing to do, and I think
Yeah.
for me, I'm really, like, design's really important to me, and I think it should be
Yeah.
important to everybody, not just as a business owner, but we all consume design every day. We are consumers of content and of design, and I think what's really interesting is you might have the substance, but if you don't have the style to match it, there's a gap, and people don't really understand that. And for me, what's really interesting is if you can marry the two together. And it came out through the research, it came out through our conversations that, we both love design, we both know the right way of doing things. And for me, what I wanted from my visual identity, I needed something that was a bit deeper than a surface pattern. And I think one of the things that we discussed, for me in design, you have surface pattern and thinking. If you can have great thinking and depth, then that allows you to build on that. If you just have a surface pattern, then for me it becomes a bit more disposable. And what was really interesting was that your personal beliefs very much married up to that kind of thinking. And then with the research, you were like, okay, where's this going? And I think what was fascinating was that we had the research, we had kind of had the right, we want a visual identity that matches the substance. And then I sort of provided you with the brand pillars. And for me, the brand pillars were already written. this is kind of an area I know really, really well. The whole idea of purpose, perception, identity, values, and the brand experience. And for me, the idea was to give you almost that information, the research and the brand pillars, to allow you to put the depth and the thinking underneath the brand. And just wondered what it was like, sort of the other side of that process for you. How did that work for you?
Yeah, no, that was good. That was great. You knew the homework, you understood the assignment. I mean, it was perfect, honestly. And like your excitement and acknowledging where you were and where you wanted to go was great. And I always like to do this step where it's like, just I'm gonna find some logos, I'm gonna find some brands, I'm gonna find some things, I'm gonna throw them at you, want you to react to them, because style is a big thing between us too. Like people just have bad style, some people have good style, you know. So but everyone has style, and I just wanted to see where we're at. And what was cool about what you did was he's like, I love colorful brands and exciting brand. You like were talking about all these things that you liked, and then when you sent me like a group of logos of all the brands that inspire you or that you liked, I was expecting like that. I was expecting like very bright, vibrant, fun logos or something like that. And you gave me like very traditional black and white, mostly black and white logos.
Yeah, I've got that. I've got them. I've got them up here.
Yeah, and you were like, what? And I'm like, well, you were talking about all this stuff, but like what you are drawn to and what you want to see and what you feel is like what your brand should look like. Like there's a disconnect here, and we broke that up. I mean, it's like which kind of guided my art direction later on. But this is like there's so many little like nuggets that you were God, I can't believe I'm saying not dropping nuggets, but you're dropping these little hints, you know, of where you want the brand identity to go without telling me directly. But just having these conversations and putting these examples in front of us gave us the ability to have these conversations and then reactions so that I could say, okay, I asked for this, he's saying this, but then he gives me this. What's that all about? And then that's like, well, there's probably why I need to do this when I start designing his brand identity.
And I think what was really interesting going through the process, and I think when you work with a designer, a consultant, a coach, or a mentor, for me, one of the key elements of that is trust. You have to have trust. And I think what was really interesting was that you and I very quickly established that. And I think there's something about to make the process work, in it, whether you're designing a visual identity or whether you're working with a mentor or coach, is you have to be honest. And I think your critiquing of where I was to who I am was really interesting. But also, you know, you brought out to me something that was pretty deep and personal, which is I've always been able to explain things and have the substance, but I've always had a challenge visually displaying that. And I think that took us to the first stage. So before you even started designing, I remember a Friday night, because I'm 5 hours ahead of you. I remember a Friday, it must have been about 6, 7 o'clock. It might have been December or January. Freezing cold.
It was December because after that call, my wife and kids were like, we're going to Disney.
Oh, yes.
And as soon as I closed that laptop, I put my coat on and we went to the airport. So I remember.
Well, there you go. And I remember you taking me through this presentation. I remember thinking at the end of it, where the hell is he going with this? And then I reflected it on the weekend and sort of came to the conclusion. But do you want to explain that and maybe show people the kind of thinking before we even started designing and why you did it? Because for me, this is the thinking that I want to explain to people.
Right. This was, I'm glad that this happened. I think it kind of, it's not like the project was going off the rails or anything like that, but it definitely,
not at all.
It saved a lot, I think, of trouble down the line if we didn't have this aha moment, which was really on me, because part of my job as a designer is to read between the lines, kind of like hear what people are saying, but also watch what people are doing, listen to how they react and get excited about some things, not other things. And like, so I'm always doing that. And you know what, like any professional designer is going to say, here's your deliverables, here's the scope, like here's when we should be done. You should be having all these things at the end of this project. This one thing actually wasn't part of it, but I needed to do it because if I didn't, I don't know if I could hit that timeline, because I was starting to get a little voice inside of me. I caught my spidey sense that was saying, we need a proper design system for this guy. And it was because of one thing that you said, because I was ready to go on vacation, come back and start working on this project. But I was like, he has to think about this while I'm gone for the next week. And when I put the design system in front of you, it was me saying, all right, I know your limitations. I get it. And how many times have we seen somebody redesign a brand or a website or a logo without instruction, and then they go and make a new page for their website, or they try to make a carousel for Instagram or
That
whatever,
becomes a car crash.
and it falls apart. And I'm like, well, it's like, well, it is hard to take this design and then just like add on to it. So you need a system. But I knew your limitations, and I knew that I wanted to use a black and white kind of photography approach to a lot of things. I had that visual down, but I know he wants color. How do I do it? So I came up, I was looking at everything, like social media, websites, squares. I've thought about this for a while, but like honestly, a designer's always making something for a square, especially today. A square, specifically a square, because like you could always fit something in a circle, right? Think about where your logo goes on LinkedIn or Instagram or anything like
Yeah,
that.
yeah.
Like circle, then your name. So like how many times have you seen a logo crammed in that circle and it looks like crap because it's not designed for that circle? You know, they took a rectangle shape and put it in there. Yeah, you know, and this is all over the place. And, you know, I think the safest thing is no matter what, a portrait or landscape rectangle is always going to cross over and make a square. And I'm like, you know what? Richard needs to be in a square. So I had fun with it. I called you a square. I said, Richard, I know you want to hear like something more
I've been
about
called worse,
like,
Brandon. I've been called worse.
no, but I said, like, I'm just going to say right now that you are a square. And you're like, Brandon. And I'm like, I know I'm being cheeky with it, but like, you hear me out. Not a square like you're a dud, but you're a square as in this is how you're going to fit in the digital space. This is how you're going to fit in presentations, websites, social media posts, and all that stuff in a feed and all that stuff. Like, you like, and here's why. So once I kind of pitched the concept, I came up with like 3 approaches and how you could use this system of being in a square. And it was from like full width, side to side imagery, or it could be inset within and have negative space. And each of the 3 had a name. I like to label things, and I like to brand the things that I do during this process. So I called Big Richard.
Yeah.
And Big Richard was like, images are big, you know, full width. They're very loud. Then you can put type on them. Little Richard was like, your images are small, and then in the negative space, that's where you would have your text. And then Half Richard, I think was the last one.
Yeah, yeah.
It was because part of this was you getting photography. You didn't have photography, so knowing you're going to get photography, I was thinking half of him could be shown as the real world, black and white photo, and the other half could be an illustration, you know, and all that stuff. So that was the idea. And I think you liked all 3, but you landed on Big Richard. And each of them had the reasons why.
They all have pros and cons. I think what's really interesting and what's really interesting for people, hopefully, that are listening, is that it was actually the system to help display how I express myself visually, whether that's on social media, whether that's through the website, even through documentation. And I think having that system to begin with, before we even started designing, was kind of that aha moment. And I must admit, it took me the weekend to figure it out.
But it was designed so you didn't break it. It was designed so that way, like if I'm not around, you should be able to make
but the thinking was right.
material following this system. And it was like trying to make it foolproof for you. Like, I don't think somebody else could come along and say, I want your square theory for my design system. Like, I don't know if it'll work for you. It was designed for Richard. Like, that's the big thing about these design systems, is knowing who's going to be touching the design, right? And how. So if you don't have
and
that,
the relevance to the business and the brand. And I think this is really important, where so many, I think, consultants and designers kind of have this one size fits all template, and we'll just press F4 and change the color. And for me, that doesn't work at all, whether it's design or whether it's kind of coaching. I think you have to tailor it. And I think by tailoring that system, I think it gave us the platform on which to move to the design. And I like the fact that what you're talking about works for me. Yes, it might work for other people. However, it's not going to work for everyone. And I think this is where templates and systemization, when it comes to design and coaching and mentoring, it has some validity. However, we're individuals as businesses, as organizations, and as people. And I think this is where, the design and the coaching, actually, there's a lot of similarities and crossover. And what's really interesting going forward, as I get my head around Instagram and various things I'm going to be doing on LinkedIn with the blogs, and we'll see that over the next few months, is how I implement that system. But having it in place is going to allow me to get the substance out with the style around it. And for me, that was really, really important. And to nail that before Christmas was fantastic. Even if it meant you going to Florida for a week to recover. Although you did come back with, some pretty good ideas for the next stage, which was the kind of 3 different design styles.
Yep. I know you want to talk about those to close out this part. It'll be a bit of a tease, but the 3 designs were based off of the big Richard design system. And as we've been talking, I'm having visuals displayed in front of us, but so people can follow along. And what I want people to be able to pay attention to is, this is an actual presentation. It's meant to have a conversation. So when I made these, I'm walking Richard through everything, and I'm explaining every reason why I chose those colors, why I chose that font, right? Any designer worth their salt should be able to articulate the whys. And I knew this was crucial for Richard because, one, Richard's in the same industry as me. We do different things, but we're both in branding and marketing and advertising and business, all that stuff. But I can't just phone it in. Not that I would, but like, I can't just say, oh, I picked this color because I thought it looked nice. Like, Richard is somebody who I was like, I don't want surface patterns. Don't just pick stuff because it looks nice. I don't need, it looks nice. It needs to look right. It needs to look like me. So, and it's a very personal thing for Richard. And it's usually personal for anybody, but like, this is him. He is Richard's Solutions. So when I was going through them, of course, I gave them names. There was Richard Gere, there was Richard
Darky, and Keith Richards.
Keith Richards, thank you. Keith Richards was the first one, yeah. And
2 Brits and an American.
Yeah, and of course, yeah, and it's funny because you're in the UK, I'm in Western New York, so yeah, there's a time difference, and I was kind of worried about that, but it never was an issue. Honestly, it was actually kind of nice because it let us kind of do our shifts. I'm on, then you're on,
Yeah.
and then you're on and stuff. And there's always something waiting for the other person and stuff like that. But yeah, I gave them these names. I like playing with your name in all this process. But the Richard Gere, actually, let me go back. Keith Richards was, I'll call it the safe design. He used Helvetica in the logo.
It's a lovely font.
Proven thing. And there's a lot of things about what Richard does is traditional, and it works. And he has a process. But the other part of Richard is kind of like what I do, right? Like you kind of, not you're winging it, but you're reactive, you're agile, you know, and like the world changes, everyone changes, every problem's got a unique solution. So like that, it was very important to me to kind of reflect that in these brands. So I started doing that a little bit with Keith Richards. I definitely did it with Richard Gere. And then with the Ringo Starr one, the last one, that's Ringo Starr. That's just his real name. That one was a kind of a blend of both, kind of a hybrid approach. And between these three, there's a spectrum for Richard to decide which one is for me. Now, he was holding it back. And I never know, honestly. I never know. Sometimes, but I never know what
I have the
people
worst
think
poker face as well.
And you
I
said
just want
that
to point that out.
what's that?
I have the worst poker face. I was trying to hide
I couldn't
extreme
tell.
excitement.
Okay. Well, you always get excited when we talk anyways about the stuff. So when it was for you, you're just like, yeah, I get to see like designs for me and all that stuff. And I just thought you were just having fun with the thing. I didn't know that by the second option, you've already made your decision. And I'm kind of glad that you did. I think I was leaning more on the third option, but with that Richard Gere, that one, now that I look at it, you made the right call. But you knew, I mean, that was my job was to say, hey, all three of these could be you. We can mix and match
And I
two.
think it's
You
worth
lock
I
right
think
in.
it's worth saying, for me, when you're picking anything, and I learned this a long time ago, picking design and picking people to work with is a bit like choosing a perfume or an aftershave. You should never try more than three, because after three, you lose the ability to smell the scent. And I think it's the same when it comes to design and people. You know, any more than three, and you know, it becomes too complicated. And for me, what was really nice about seeing the three different options was there were merits in all three of them. But what I didn't want to do was to create kind of a hybrid. What I wanted to do was look at one of them and go, yes. And what was interesting is it started off, and I looked at the first logo, and you were taking me through the presentation. I was like,
Mm.
oh, yes, yes, I like this.
Which
The
I think your
Helvetica
wife,
font.
right? Like she's like,
Oh,
hey, if
she
I was,
she she really liked it. And then the
yeah.
second one came up, and I was like, okay, this is interesting. And oh, I get it. Yes. And in my brain, I was like,
It
this
was
is the one.
and you're wearing
This
it
is the
right
one.
now. I mean, like plot twist, there he is. He's wearing it right now. But like the R, I'm sorry, the R mark was very um time consuming, I guess, when it came to making that option because I didn't want you to just have a regular R. And I knew what I wanted to do with the R, and I was making all these versions of this R, but like I was like, knowing how Richard is, he is a fashion boy. He loves fashion brands. He does. He likes those classic ones. He likes anything from like Nike to like Jack Daniels, but you're always like dropping all these like brands that you like and inspire, and they always tend to be like in the fashion world. And I'm like, he gets excitement out of a brand that says, hey, look at me. And there's nothing wrong with that. And it's not surface pattern. So because it's not just like a pretty
Oh,
R,
it has to
it's
have
R
substance.
that is a nod to your love of fashion, something that you probably want to wear. And we were coming from a place, and I understand the things that were happening in business and in life that you were going through. And I knew it was important to have this badge, this R. There's more to the logo, but like the R that is like something that you could rally yourself behind and keep yourself motivated,
Which is what a brand
inspiring
should do.
yourself. Right. You know, the owner of a company should look at their logo and say, God, I'm glad that's my logo. I'm like glad people
Yeah.
like it. And I wanted you to have that. So the second option, the Richard Gere option, was designed to be worn with pride, not just to be a logo, but like slap it on a hat because it needs to
Hey,
be seen.
it absolutely needed. It needed to have that depth, and I think what's nice is in the second part of the video we'll talk about sort of the thinking behind it. What I wanted to close out was what was really fascinating for me was at the end of the presentation, you showed me your sketchbook, and you've been
Yeah.
kind of sketching out lots of different things, and you held it up, and I was like, I think it's really interesting how people's brains work and how we talk about this a lot. If you walk around with your eyes open, you can pick up so much. And seeing your little sketches and talking to you about the thinking behind it, I was like, yes, this is the direction of travel we're going to go. And this is kind of leading us very nicely into the second part of the video. So, oh, there's the sketchbook. There you go.
When I sketch like crazy. Mostly for logos. I'm pretty quick with like websites and design, stuff like that. But and there's other ones that I have in my Adobe Illustrator files. And yeah, and I just make a little check mark next to the ones that like get me going. Sometimes I just like I get the obvious ones out, I get some of the bad ones out.
Yeah.
I try to, but you can see right here, I was starting to lean in on that one. I'm like, that was just the one that you're using now. And yeah, it was, I'll tell you this, man. Finding inspiration for the letter R, there aren't many logos that have a good looking R, It's just a generic R. And I'm like, no, he's gonna own the letter R. He's gonna have his own. I want kids or whatever, like people who are like looking to be inspired by other designers and they have like, I have a logo with the R, what can I do? I want mine to be part of their mood board. That would make me happy.
Nice.
It's designed to be
nice. And I think just to summarize the first part of what we're talking about, when it comes to doing a brand redesign or a brand design, I think there are a few things to recognize. One is, where are you now and where do you want to be? I think you also need to look at the market research. I think you need to look very carefully at your brand pillars and really understand who you are. And then I think you need to work with somebody that you trust that can take you to that better place. And I think you need to be able to challenge them. And we talked about the system that was built before the design. That really, really helped put the solid foundations down. And then the next stage is, right, what are the 3 design options? Any more than 3, I think you're asking too much of yourself. And from that foundation, we picked on the Richard Gere and as a naming concept. And then the second part of what we're going to talk about is the thinking behind it and how we did the execution across the whole visual identity for Richer Solutions. So thank you for joining us for part 1 of the rebranding of Richer Solutions.